Hey everyone, you're getting part two of a really fun conversation I got to have with trauma therapist Kathy Kinghorn. She is incredible. When I created my initial advanced trauma coach certification, she was part of that. We worked on the syllabus together, and way back then, she was on all the calls as well. And then after doing it for 2 rounds with me, she's like, yeah, it feels redundant for both of us to be here, but I really wanted to acknowledge her being a part of it at the very beginning. So for those of you who are considering doing my coach certifications, we have been able to save some of her teaching videos on internal family systems in the portal. So you can still have access to those, and they're really lovely. So without further ado, here is part 2 of 2. So hopefully we've presented enough of a picture for you guys to kind of see how we have this internal family system. And a great way to think about it is to consider your nuclear family and how people step up and show up and make themselves big or make themselves small for the survival of a family. If you're in a family of 5 and the mother gets cancer, the dad goes and gets a second job, and oldest child starts working, and the second oldest child starts taking the younger child to school, like they all step up and show up and adapt in the name of keeping that family alive. And then what can happen is, let's say that the mother gets better. Some of those parts that adapt stay that way because it's a survival strategy. That oldest child may continue to feel like they always have to work, or that dad may feel like he can never go back to just having one job, right? So these adaptive strategies can continue in their distorted state. If we remain unconscious to them, we can see that it happens internally and in our nuclear families and other families. And we wanted to bridge this into the state of the USA right now. How do you see that with the exiles and the managers and the protectors? What do you see, and how could you help people bridge into that metaphor for all of us to see what's going on with respect to the state of our country, but also what can we do as well?
Yeah, there's Richard Schwartz, how he names parts is what we've been talking about. The manager, the protector. I just touched on exile. Lindsay and I could do another one for an hour just on that. But there's actually another part that's called the firefighter.
Mm-hmm.
Firefighters put the fire out, but they also burn the house down. My take on the US right now is we've got a lot of firefighters burning democracy down, burning the Constitution down, burning everything down. We're in a state of high alert. Our parts are leading the way rather than stepping back and having conversations that are about curiosity. We all need to belong somewhere. We're finding this splintering of where do I belong? That splintering is also causing an epidemic of loneliness. When people get lonely, I feel like the lonelier you get, the meaner you get. And so I think there's so many answers to what you're saying about our US right now. I think we've become more disconnected, so we're more lonely. So now we're more mean. We want to belong somewhere. And then our firefighters come out and say, here's where I belong. And I'm going to come out in a way that's so destructive, even if my heart would say, I want to be part of the solution. The ends don't justify the means. We've just got a lot of, I think, firefighters that are flying, throwing arrows at each other, and there's not that sense of unity on both sides of the table. You
Mm-hmm.
know, not just one. I mean, right now, I would say our leadership is epically failing, and the incompetency has, I don't think, ever been seen since our nation came to pass. But there's also extremes on both sides. So I think we're in a very precarious place. Think about just internally. If you're listening to this, my guess is you're old enough to have gone through some terrible times, times that take your breath away, times that as your breath's being taken away, you wonder, do I even want to take my next breath? I would imagine everyone listening has had some of those traumas in their life. Can you imagine if that continued over days, weeks, months, years? And that's the time that we're living in the US right now, the chaos, the uncertainty, the feeling of hopelessness, the feeling of it's so far gone, there's nothing, it's just too far gone.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what this girl explained in her TikTok was that these protector parts, which are protective over our legacy systems, may be very, in my opinion, very archaic and outdated and protecting only like an elite few while so many are being harmed. It feels like those protector parts are kind of losing it. And so what she says is that's represented by white supremacy, heteropatriarchy, capitalism, and religious nationalism. And so what she says is that these are likened to legacy managers in IFS, once protective, now increasingly harmful and rigid. What would you say to that?
Yeah, I think that when we're not conscious,
Hmm.
when we're not responding, when we don't know the value that we're anchoring to, the wheels come off. So
Hmm.
our can do as an action step is look inside and go, not just what's my value, but how did I come to believe in that value? And does my belief in how I operationalize that value, do they match? I believe in equality, that all men are created equal, women as well, but we're created equal. So that's my value. And how do I operationalize that value? I treat people with respect. That's my belief. You respect others. You can disagree, but you don't have to be screaming and shouting and changing laws to prevent other beliefs. I think a good first step where it can feel like you're doing something, because I certainly feel a little bit stagnant in what's the way forward for me personally, but it's what are my values and how did I come to believe in them? And do they hold true for me now?
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's kind of forcing an awakening on a lot of people, an awakening to, okay, what are my values? Can I watch families get torn apart? Mothers who are nursing their baby. And does that fit with my value set of human dignity, human rights?
The reason I say how did I come to believe too is like if you just said, what do you believe about hard work? It's easy to say, well, I believe everybody should work hard, and that's my belief. Well, how did you come to believe that everybody should work hard? Because how you come to believe it could be do what you lift where you stand. Whatever you can do that thing. Some people, because they have a disability, whether the disability is seen or not seen, it can appear to not be hardworking. And so it's a place where if you really look inside and go, how did I come to believe something? Then you can unpackage it from a different way. I do believe that people deserve medical care,
Hmm.
whether or not they can afford it.
Hmm.
But if I believe, well, you have to work hard to get medical care, then how I came to believe in hard work is a whole different story. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think we've all internalized so much from the systems we were raised in that sometimes we don't realize how subjective a lot of it is. When I think of some of the circles I might run around in with respect to my own privilege, my own white privilege, when people do really well, they're always very quick to be like, but I worked my butt off. I worked for this. I earned this. And I get that. And I see that. And I believe that. And there are plenty of other people who work their butt off, but because of the structure, the system with which they may be privileged or oppressed, they're working their butt off making 20,000 a year. Right. And then, like you said, people with the mental health stuff as well, where it's like they look like they're not working hard, but what if they're actually working really hard? Yeah.
And it's like systemic racism. I did a paper once on white privilege and how I came to believe in systemic racism was through a lot of research
Mhm.
for that paper and having a black grandson and walking in stores and how different it is walking in a store when I have him with me,
Mhm.
who he has a master's degree and is going to be working on a doctorate soon and is just a phenomenal kid. Don't tell me that there's not systemic racism, because how I came to believe it in my lived experience and my academic experience of researching the actual data that proves it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's been interesting for me too. This could be a whole other episode, a processing episode, Kathy, where you help me with my parts and all of this. But just it's like the grief that I feel living in a red state where so many people don't see or don't proactively take a look at some of this stuff because it's hard and it's not easy to, right? Like when the George Floyd stuff came up about 5 years ago, it wasn't easy for me to take a look at it as systemic racism, but it just felt like something I needed to do. And so there's a part of me where it's like finding that space between grieving, like people's blindness, the privilege to be blind to some of this stuff, while also not thinking that I know where everybody should be, right? Or where everyone is on their dharmic path. Anyway, that could be a whole other thing. But if we come back to the US, my body, nuclear family, the community I live in, and then we've got the USA, right? And so we have the metaphor of these protective parts, these legacy systems, losing it and maybe even doubling down through control. It's a known dynamic of entrenched power systems under potential perceived threat. And I feel that from the top. That's kind of how I see it. What this girl says is she sees exiles as like these traumatized or silenced parts who may be present day oppressed communities who are bringing their ancestral grief and pain to the surface, flooding the system. This brings the idea of epigenetics or intergenerational trauma to the surface as well. And so we've got that piece where we see a lot of people suddenly coming in and speaking up and advocating and protesting and using their voice however they can, which I think is really beautiful as well. And so for me, I see that as a hope of maybe a dissolution of some of these power systems, just a dissolution of control, and maybe us upgrading into this new way of being, even though it doesn't feel amazing right now. But what other like parts do you kind of see at play in this if we kind of like to look at the US as that? When you mentioned the firefighters as well, right?
The firefighters are certainly there. I think the power is always in who has the power to ask the question.
Mm-hmm.
Think about the rights movement. What are we going to do with the slaves? Well, white men had the power to ask that question. What are we going to do with all these women that want to vote? White men had the power to ask that question. So I'm always curious about who is asking the question and how did they get the power to ask that question? Like, how are we going to dismantle Medicare? Well, there's certainly a lot of white men asking that question. That group has the power to ask the question. And we're making inroads, but there's still that power within that group. And so that collective part does believe that it's trying to solve a problem in a way that makes sense, that allows for survival. But I think that survival is more based on their personal financial gain than the country's financial gain.
Yeah. And then when they're swimming in that fishbowl with all of their colleagues who are doing the same, it just creates a disconnect where they forget that these are people, right?
Yeah. I think W.E. Du Bois said, and if I'm wrong, I apologize, but I believe it was him that said, how does it feel to be a problem? In our current environment, people that are far removed from the real problems that need to be addressed in the United States are deciding who is the problem and what the solution is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think just the accountability, integrity come to my mind as well, right? Our own representative in Utah, people were upset about public lands being put up for sale. And he tweeted recently, like, hunters, you spoke, I listened. So I guess it was the hunters. But what about the women? What about everyone else, right? Just brings to the forefront, which again, another podcast, but like When I look at who he was running against, just so much internalized misogyny where we just vote for the man without even really thinking or considering or taking time to proactively look at other people's values and how smart and capable they are. So when it comes to seeing the US, it gives me hope when you can look at the US through that lens of IFS. I like the idea because I think the more that people are healing on their own and accessing their self energy, creative solutions come from accessing that self energy. And so I think creative solutions can come to pass more often. The more we all do that on a micro level, the more that we're going to be able to do it on a macro level and either speak up enough so that those people listen or truly vote them out, vote the people out who are putting people's lives at risk. I'm seeing people in wheelchairs have to go protest because of Medicaid. That is not okay with me. I know that not all countries are perfect, but after living in France for 6 years, seeing people have health emergencies, have cancer, have their daughter, have a child fighting for their life for 3 years in and out of hospitals, helicoptered left, right, and that child passing away and not even having a bill. Losing a child or losing a partner or family member to cancer is already enough, but to get a 100, 200, $500,000 bill in the mail when someone dies, to me, no one should have to live with this low level anxiety of like, I'm one step away from a medical bankruptcy, or even I'm one step away from like, we live in a safe area, but a school shooting could happen. I don't think America realizes the low level buzzing anxiety is just there because it's our normal. There's this quality of life piece that people get to enjoy. And again, it's not perfect. I lived there for 6 years. So you see the underbelly as well. It's not perfect, but there were those pieces that I thought were really, really powerful. And you were going to say something about, was it Holland or something in Holland that, what
Yeah,
was that?
a lot of what I love about IFS is that it brings the unconscious to the conscious. And one they've found now, and you mentioned about epigenetics earlier, Lindsay, they've found that we have these legacy burdens at a cellular level. The Dutch people, they had, as the World War II was ending, they had what was called the hunger winter. It was the worst winter on record, I think. Children born during that time had a far greater rate of obesity and diabetes. And they're showing that those intergenerational changes happen. We're burdened with the legacies that have been left behind. But if we're burdened with the legacies, then to me, the flip side of it is we could be blessed by the legacy. We are leaving a legacy. You don't want it to be one that burdens our children and grandchildren, great grandchildren. So when I think about it from the macro level of what legacy blessing can I leave for my posterity, that calms me. Because with all the chaos going around, it feels like an empowering question for me. It
Mm-hmm.
feels like there's still time to leave that legacy that they can be blessed with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it was Eckhart Tolle who said that someone who's consciously doing their inner work does so much more collectively and energetically for the macro group than we could even picture or imagine. I think when we are bringing whatever's unconscious to our consciousness to look at and decide what we want to do with it, decide if there's something to change, we're all going to have different answers. But we won't know what our answers are. We won't be able to bring our internal strokes of genius to the table unless we start listening in the way Kathy was talking about, that little exercise she took you through of like, who's here? Who's here? Who's here? Who's at the table today? And so I think it was Martha Beck who said, we don't need a revolution. We need a dissolution of these systems of power. And I love that too, because to me, a nonviolent approach, that's a huge thing. I don't think we need to fight war with war. I've seen these funny jokes where men will make comments about like, well, women going to war, women making decisions about war, and seeing women say, we would just know how to not even have to go to war. We would solve the problem before it needs to get violent. And And again, we're generalizing, of course, but I think there's something to be said for that. Like the more that we can all access that self energy piece, the more humans in the United States and the world can access that self energy that's calm, that's clear, that's curious, that's compassionate, that's creative. I think more creative solutions will come to the table so that the systems of oppression that are clearly here can be dismantled and dissolved so that what's meant to will come through.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you would want to share that could be helpful to our listeners today?
Like we had such a great conversation and we know each other so well, our hearts. Leave comments, ask questions. This is really a conversation between two old friends that we've hoped you've enjoyed. We really do hope that we are going to see a brighter tomorrow. We've lived through tough times, but I just hope that we are leaving you with a sense of hope and maybe some information on the internal system that you have.
Okay. So, one last question for you. What gives you hope that things are shifting and changing and transforming?
I look at what was going on in the 60s where it seemed a lot of anarchy almost with people saying, I'm going to dodge the draft and I don't believe in Vietnam. There was big contention between the powers to be and the people rising up and staking their claim in things. What gives me hope is that we moved past that time and we moved to some better days after those days. And we learned a lot from those days. We're in a learning phase right now. And what we do with that knowledge gives me hope. I think back to what you were saying, Lindsay, there's a lot to be done as we learn in the time we're in right now. Things are happening that we never thought would happen. So we're having to learn quickly. What we choose to do with that knowledge gives me hope that people will choose the better way.
Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, we can find out what our truth is. So much so that even if my partner's lying his face off to me, I can know something's off. And we all have that power and that inner authority in our system. And we all have the ability to get there. And there's a lot of different ways to get there, which is why I love bringing therapists like Kathy on this podcast. It's just something I've been thinking about. Like we all have access to figure out our truth, right? And the more people can do that, the more the world's going to be a better place, the more new ideas are going to come to the table. And we don't have to think in this binary or tribalistic way. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
Kathy, thank you so much for being here. We'll probably split this podcast into 2 parts. It's been perfect. We'll make sure her website and everything is in the show notes for anyone who wants to get in touch with her or her practitioners that she trains. Does it sound good?
Great. Great to be here, Lindsay.
Yeah, thanks again. Thank you so much for listening to this lovely long episode. And if you're looking for a little bit of community or a space to be seen or heard or learn more about your spirituality after leaving religion, take a look at my show notes. Come join my resourced community. It's free and it's a place for you to learn more about who you are and learn your truth and really validate yourself wherever you're at with respect to that. And I hope to see you there. And if you feel like you're interested in doing a coach certification program, we have a cohort starting up this fall in September. And typically, the earlier you sign up, the better. There are more bonuses for people who sign up earlier. So take a look at that as well and have a wonderful, wonderful week.